Hello, welcome to Baltic World, the premier channel discussing news and important issues facing Northern, Central and Eastern Europe. My name is Crispin, and today we've got an incredible new survey on what Lithuanians really think about their foreign policy. A number of interesting things have been thrown up, specifically about China. Also, a couple of housekeeping things. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you to Porzo for suggesting Between Shades of Grey for the next book club. That'll be coming up in January. Charlene and I have finished it. It is a fascinating read on the expulsion of Baltic peoples right up to Siberia by the NKVD. It's an incredible novel, the best I've read so far on these subjects. It is by Ruta Sapites, and please stay tuned for that. It's a very underrated book. It's only been out about 10 years, but I am really excited to review that text. So thank you very much for that suggestion. Please leave more suggestions for the future book club on any text coming out of the Baltic, because we're really enjoying that segment. Anyway, this article is from Lithuania Radio and Television, and it says, Lithuanians skeptical about confrontation with China, but support Belarus policy, says a survey. Lithuanians have differing opinions about the major foreign policy questions. Almost half support Lithuania's policy vis-a-vis Belarus, but only a third of its position on China, a survey commissioned by LRT suggests. On 3 to 24 November, the pollster Norstat polled 1,000 people, a sample representing the country's population. Respondents were asked to evaluate Lithuania's foreign policy questions. Now, before I go on, I was really excited to find this survey. Australia has an equivalent. It's the Lowy Institute poll, where 1,000 Australians from all walks of life are surveyed on a broad range of foreign policy and strategic questions. It is published annually, and it forms a key part of our understanding of how the Australian populace views various countries and issues. I was incredibly surprised to see a sort of an equivalent survey in Lithuania. So kudos to LRT for commissioning this. I think it's quite valuable. Anyway, going on, asked if they supported Lithuania's policy towards Belarus, 49% of those surveyed said they did, 37% said they did not, while 15% had no opinion on the issue. Since August 2020, when Belarus's strongman leader claimed victory in a presidential election widely seen as rigged, Vilnius has been supporting the country's democratic opposition and refusing to recognize Lukashenko as a legitimate president. Lithuania has also been pushing for EU sanctions on the Lukashenko regime for its violent crackdown on anti-government protesters. Now, it's not surprising that more people approve than disapprove of Lithuania's policy towards Belarus. Belarus is a country right on Lithuania's border. You've got the hybrid kind of attack from Lukashenko against Lithuania, the migrant crisis. You also have the government in exile, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, giving speeches, going around Lithuania, drumming up support. You've got the historical connection with Belarus and the Polish-Lithuania Commonwealth. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania incorporated much of Belarusian territory as it is today. And of course, Lithuania has its own experience in living under brutal and repressive dictatorship. So all of that happening in that space, I'm sure many Lithuanians do feel a sense of personal responsibility to reach out to their Belarusian compatriots and try and support democratic reform. So the fact that more people approve than disapprove is not surprising, although having 37% of Lithuania's population disapproving is quite significant. And we'll see if it goes into why there is that minority view. Anyway, going on, according to the survey, the most supportive of Lithuania's policy vis-a-vis Belarus were residents of Vilnius, 62%, and Kaunas, 57%. In Klaipėda, 51% of respondents expressed support for Lithuania's position on its neighbouring country. In other cities, support was below 50%, while in rural areas it was 41%. Among the respondents with higher education, 60% said they supported Lithuania's policy towards Belarus, while among those with secondary education, 35% approved of it. The most supportive of Lithuania's policy towards Belarus were top and middle level managers, while those in specialist positions. Support for this policy among workers was 35% and 33% among the unemployed. The survey has also shown a correlation between people's income and their support for Lithuania's policy towards Belarus, with those earning higher income being the most supportive of it. Now, this, we'll leave it there for now. We'll go back to it when it discusses China. So how to interpret these results? Well, on the one hand, the urban-rural divide exists right across the world. The UK, Europe, Australia, the United States. Well, the voting patterns between the inner cities and the rural areas are radically different in all of those places. Take America, for example. If you're in the coastal urban elite, vote strongly Democrat, whereas the rural heartland is just washed red with Republican votes. People who tend to be more conservative, more national security minded, they are economically populist. Well, in Lithuania, it seems to be the reverse voting pattern. That is, the more rural you are, the less likely you're going to be nationalist, conservative voting, standing up to these kind of regimes, Lukashenko, as we'll see with China as well. And it's the younger people in Lithuania that are pro-freedom, pro-democracy, pro-individual human rights. And the reason for this, I think, and we'll go into it in more detail in a bit, but the reason I think is that young people, when they're in Lithuania, the rebellion isn't towards the left. It's to be more right-wing. So in the United States, for example, or Australia or the UK, younger voters are far more left. So if you think of the people that voted for Jeremy Corbyn in the UK or Bernie Sanders in the United States, they tend to be educated, young, sort of university elite types who are kind of enamored by socialist philosophies, Marx, communism, because largely they haven't had any experience of it. Whereas young Lithuanians are raised on the threat posed, the perennial threat posed to democracy, individual freedom, sovereignty of the individual, expression, human rights, and so forth. And so standing up for those things is an alienable part of their national identity, whereas older people, more rural voters in Lithuania, I hypothesize, remember the kind of tail end of communism and then the sort of crony capitalism of the 90s. And because they are impoverished, they're kind of being left behind by this European experiment. They are more bemoaning sort of what they were used to before. They are more hearkening back to those sort of communist days, not necessarily with nostalgia, but a sense of stability. And so seeing the Lithuanians as a small country, fighting Belarus, standing up to China, creating issues with Russia, they are saying, well, why are we doing this? Why aren't we just focusing on our own little patch and being more parochially minded? That's my suspicion, but let's continue. It says, the situation was different when it comes to Lithuania's policy toward China and Taiwan. Vilnius has been shunning cooperation with Beijing and, to China's protestations, recently opened a Taiwanese representative office. Only 34% of respondents supported Lithuania's current position on the issue, while 41% did not approve of it, and another 26% had no opinion. In Vilnius, 47% of the population supported the policy, while in other cities, support was below 40%. Among those with higher education, 40% approved of Lithuania's policy towards China and Taiwan, while among those with lower education, support was around 25%. Now, this is a fascinating statistic. I would have assumed that a large majority of Lithuanians strongly supported what its government was doing in terms of moral foreign policy, standing up to the big bully of China and showing the way to the rest of Europe by supporting Taiwan and not kowtowing before communist dictatorship demands. And yet, this support shouldn't have surprised me, this level of disapproval, because China is a very long way away. And I had heard questions from Lithuanians, why are we doing this? What's our bone in this fight? Why are we making enemies of a major power thousands of kilometers away? Do we not have problems enough of our own? Well, what does this survey say? Let's go into it. So according to Yeva Petrinite Urbanisvicinė. Oh my goodness. This is a hyphenated Lithuanian name. Come on. A political science professor in Vilnius University. The survey results were not surprising because, quote, we can see on the social media too that there is both strong approval and disapproval of Lithuania's foreign policy. But the public support for Lithuania's policy towards Belarus is significant, she said. We have a high percentage of people who support Lithuania's policy towards Belarus. Almost 50% support is very high, especially taking into account the fact that the current government is not that popular. Pitronite Urban Vicine told LRT. How did I do, guys? Political analyst Mažvydas Jastrimiskis said that the Lithuania's policy vis-a-vis Belarus was continuous and therefore less dependent on political preferences. That's a good point. So if you've got a government that isn't particularly popular and is taking the country in a radical new direction, then you're going to lose a lot of people who are reflexively anti that party. So we've got a political party that's dominant in Lithuania in the governing space, but is unpopular with the electorate, and therefore starting a fight with China will create suspicion among those that don't like that party. That is certainly true in Australia and other places as well. If a government is unpopular, has a lot of enemies domestically, then if the government does something, then reflexively the attitude is going to be, we don't necessarily support this. And yet there is a bipartisan, multi-party support towards the policy in Belarus, standing up for human rights, recognizing the illegitimacy of the Lukashenko regime, supporting transition, encouraging sanctions, and supporting the government in exile. So it doesn't really matter who's in office in Lithuania. Everyone is going to promote that. And because that has broad party support, there is a lot of positive messaging around that, meaning that most people in the country will likely support Lithuania's policy on Belarus. However, quote, the policy towards Belarus concerns not only the current but also previous government. Jastrimisk says the tougher stance towards Belarus, the non-recognition of Lukashenko and the presidential election results, as well as sanctions started under the government of former Prime Minister Saulius Skvernelis and continue under the current conservative government. Makes sense. So we can expect a greater consensus among the public because this issue transcends political camps, he's added. But according to Jastrimiskis, it is difficult to evaluate the public's opinion on Lithuania's policy towards Belarus as it is a multifaceted issue. Quote, a person answering a question about the policy towards Belarus may think about sanctions against Lukashenko, negotiation or non-negotiation with him, as well as about pushing migrants away from Lithuania-Belarus border. So it is not entirely clear which part of the policy we're talking about, the political analyst said. Now that's also a useful point, because if you survey an individual, depends on the preceding questions as to what you're going to be asked. A Yes minister gave a wonderful skit about this. You go to someone, do you worry about increasing crime? Yes. Do you think that people are too soft on criminals in the justice system? Yes. Are there stronger measures that could be taken to support and protect those who are victims of crime? Yes. Would you support this measure, which is being proposed by the government of the day, purportedly to be tough on crime? The next natural answer is going to be, from most people, yes, and therefore you can just ignore the first four questions, publish the last one, and you've got a skewed survey result. So if you get into the nitty detail of what people are thinking about when they're talking about Lithuania's Belarus policy, is it the migrants? Is it Lukashenko? Is it dealings with Russia? Is it Lithuania stands within the European Union? If you get into a specific aspect of what is a multifaceted policy, you will have a broad range of views, and some of them will not align. Some people might be pro-refugees but anti-Lukashenko, for example. Regarding Lithuania's policy towards China and Taiwan, political analysts highlighted the high level of public decision on the issue. Quote, if we are asked about the same-sex civil partnership law, only a few percent would have no opinion. Here, 26% have no opinion, which is very high, Miskus said. And that's true. 1 in 4 people not having an opinion is extremely high on any issue, particularly one of such significant foreign policy importance. According to the political analyst, the China-Taiwan issue is new in Lithuania's foreign policy agenda, so people are still forming their opinions about it. Okay, so that's a great survey, and I commend LRT for commissioning it. What explains the lack of support for Lithuania's policy towards China and Taiwan? Well, on the one hand, it makes perfect sense that many people in Lithuania would be questioning why they're making an enemy of a country of 1.5 billion people on the other side of the world, when Lithuania surely has problems enough of its own vis-a-vis Russia and Belarus. There's a logic and intuition to that position. What I would say is that Lithuania is getting a lot of positive out of its strong principled stance vis-a-vis Taiwan. First of all, the United States has to shift focus away from Europe towards Asia if it is to check China's growing power, if it's to support America's position in the Asia-Pacific into the future. It needs to focus laser-like on the challenge of China, and particularly over Taiwan. So Lithuania's strong principled stance in Europe over Taiwan gets a lot of public and positive attention in the United States. It means that Lithuania will not be forgotten, even as the United States pivots away from Europe towards Asia. The United States will be increasingly supportive of Lithuania's security because of these strong measures. Secondly, it provides a real test for the European Union to live up to. When you've got a major country bullying a small member of the European Union, the European Union feels galvanized because it recognizes that its credibility is at stake. One of the great messages from the European Union is that we should all band together because that way we can collectively bargain with the major powers, in particular China. Well, if Lithuania is being bullied by China, then the European Union has a strong incentive to create a powerful response in support of Lithuania. And then also Taiwan should not be dismissed. Taiwan is willing to invest heavily in its international recognition. I remember a case years ago where it was a disaster in Taiwan, a real scandal, where they provided $33 million to a couple of people in the Solomon Islands, thinking that those individuals were able to shift support away from Beijing towards Taipei diplomatically. So they were willing to cough up money, significant money, for that recognition. Now that Lithuania is being punished by China, Taiwan will have a strong incentive to support Lithuania economically, minimize any adverse impact financially that Lithuania experiences, because it'll encourage other countries in the world to similarly support Taiwan in the future. Taiwan is very switched on about this, and so you could expect a lot of financial investment from Taiwan and capital flooding into Lithuania as a result. I know there's been a $600 million US fund from the United States to soften the impact of China's boycott of Lithuanian products from the United States. It remains to be seen what the EU will do. But nevertheless, this is really good strategically, and I don't think it's going to be harmful economically. I think the other countries in the region, in the wider world, will do much to support Lithuania while China seeks to bully it. Now, that said, we have seen an escalation in recent days. There was a major article in Reuters interviewing the Deputy Foreign Minister of Lithuania, who pointed to the fact that China was now punishing third-party businesses, encouraging them to cease their business activities with Lithuania or else risk losing the Chinese market. So let's say you're a major supermarket chain, you're importing a lot of Chinese products, but you also import a few products from Lithuania. Well, China is now saying, look, you have to cut your ties to Lithuania, otherwise you won't be getting any of our products, or vice versa. You won't be able to sell to Chinese customers. Now, this could have a major impact on private companies who are looking at the bottom line. Governments, not so much, but individual businesses that are like, well, okay, 80% of my products come from China and 1% comes from Lithuania. What am I going to do here? Well, obviously, I'm going to support China. So this could be a real risk for Lithuania, but a real risk for China as well. It's never really done this before, where it's gone after third-party private companies in an effort to really attack another foreign power. This is uncharted territory. And if we start to see sort of publicized examples of this, I think the retaliation or approachment, not just from the EU, but from the entire world against the Chinese government over these kinds of tactics will be very great. And finally, just the sheer morality of it. Is it a good thing to stand up to tyrants around the world? Well, it does create Lithuania's new reputation that I'm seeing all over the place as to its strong, principled foreign policy stance. It's a proud country with a great, hardy, resilient people who have suffered after decades of repressive Soviet dictatorship and yet maintain their language, their culture, their identity. They're now flourishing as an independent state. And this is really putting them on the world map, this kind of David and Goliath battle between Lithuania and the evil empire of the Chinese Communist Party. And China's extreme reaction looks churlish and weak. If you look at it from a third-party perspective, you've got this tiny country, which a safe, secure country, major power like China should just ignore. Like, they shouldn't care whether they have an office with Taiwan or not. The fact that they're having this histrionic, overwhelming reaction makes the Chinese Communist Party look extremely small and makes Lithuania look like it has very broad shoulders by comparison. So both economically, in terms of the international support that Lithuania is receiving, its political profile on the world stage is very attractive to many people in the world, and the security aspect as America pivots away from Europe towards Asia. Well, it has in mind what's happening to Lithuania, both from Russia, but also from China, firmly in its mind, in its political discourse. I've heard Lithuania mentioned in Congress far more than in the past few months than I had in all the years prior to that. And it's all been universally positive. How they're going to support the Lithuanians is a conversation that we have here in Australia, the Australian government level. We've got a new Lithuanian ambassador here in Australia. Various ministers at the government level are talking about how to support Lithuania in its fight against China and its protecting its security against Russia. So this is a unifying foreign policy position that is really, I think, going to help Lithuania long term by taking a firm position early and going strong. I think from a financial and security perspective, this will benefit Lithuania, as well as just being a matter of great national pride and international profile. That's my view, but understandable. I mean, this is a major, scary power, China. Don't want to downplay that in any way. It is many thousands of kilometers from Lithuania's borders. Lithuania does have problems much closer to home, so it's not surprising that people throw up their hands and wonder why they're picking these fights. But I actually think that there is a long-term benefit to taking this principled stance. That's my position. Love to hear your views. Please leave your opinions down below. I know this video might be a long one because we went through the whole survey, but I really think it's quite important. Great that they're doing it. I hope they keep this up year on year because that'll create a chronology of shifting positions over time and really send these trends. I hope we do see this in years to come, and I'll continue to report on it then. Thank you so much, and see you next time. Goodbye.